65 is not an age to be happy about every new day, especially when you're alone in a house on the outskirts of Emporia, where every corner reminds you of someone who's no longer with you. I got out of bed at 6 in the morning, as I had done for the past 30 years, whether it was a weekday or a weekend. My fingers fumbled for the switch on the desk lamp, and its dim light brought out the picture of Alice on the nightstand. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said, as I'd done every day for the last 3 years since her death. There was silence in response. I'd gotten used to having only one voice in the house now. My voice, my footsteps, my cough in the morning. I folded the blanket neatly, even though no one had ever seen me make the bed. Old habits die harder than people. My name is Raymond Caldwell, but everyone just calls me Ray, except for my son Ethan, who lately has preferred not to call me anything at all. Our relationship could only be described in one word: complicated. Well, when was it ever simple? I don't remember. The morning ritual hasn't changed for years. A contrast shower, a shave, a cup of strong coffee without sugar, and a daily planner open at today's date. Working as the head of the security department at Emporia Development, a construction company, required punctuality and attention to detail, qualities I valued in life as well. At 8:30, I was already sitting at my desk in a small office with blinds that let in just enough light not to strain my eyes, but enough to see everything I needed to see. On the wall were certificates and certificates of merit, photos from corporate events, where I always stood a little apart, with my back straight and my gaze scrutinizing the people around me. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell." Dorothy's secretary, a woman in her 50s with brown hair pulled back in a tight bun, greeted me. "There's an inspection of the Riverside Avenue facility at 10 today, a safety meeting at 12:30, and here's your mail." She placed a small stack of envelopes on the desk and turned to leave. "Thank you, Dorothy." I nodded as I began to sort through the mail. Invoices, flyers, a letter from the IRS, just the usual. And then I saw it, a cream-colored envelope of heavy paper with ornate lettering. I rarely receive personal letters, so I noticed it immediately. Opening the envelope, I pulled out a gold embossed card. "It is our pleasure to invite you to the engagement party of Ethan Caldwell and Prudence Baxter. Time, date, address of a downtown restaurant. And no personal signature. Nothing that said it was an invitation from a son for a father, not a casual acquaintance. Ethan, my only son, 28 years old, but sometimes I think he's still a 14-year-old teenager, resentful of the world and especially of me. After Alice died, the gulf between us grew even deeper. He blamed me for not paying enough attention to her during her illness, for being too absorbed in my work, and I blamed myself for the same thing, but I never told him about it. I hadn't seen Ethan in almost a year. The last time we'd seen each other was on Christmas Day, when he'd stopped by for 20 minutes to drop off a scarf I'd never worn, and to let me know he was moving downtown. We exchanged a few words about the weather, his job at the IT company, and my health. I learned about his having a girlfriend from our mutual acquaintances, and now an engagement invitation. I put the card aside. Work is never waiting, especially when you are responsible for the safety of construction projects, where any mistake can cost someone's life. The day went as usual: inspection, meeting, reports, calls to contractors. I got home at 6 in the evening, put the car in the garage, and walked into an empty house. Eating dinner alone had long since become a habit. Warming up the remains of last night's lasagna, I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out the invitation again. 3 days from now. Should I go or not? On the one hand, it was an important event in my son's life. On the other, I wasn't sure he really wanted me there. Maybe it was just a matter of propriety. I remembered our last serious conversation, 6 months after Alice's funeral. "You didn't even cry at her funeral," Ethan had said to me. "You stood there like a goddamn robot." "Not everyone expresses grief the same way," I replied quietly. "It's not about grief. The point is that you have always been like that. Cold, calculating, incapable of normal human emotions. Ethan, I understand that you—" "No, you don't understand anything. You never understood me or Mom. You were always busy with your damn job, your rules and your plans. You controlled every aspect of our lives and were never interested in what we wanted. I provided for the family, made sure you had money, a roof over your head. What about time, attention, support? Do you know that mom cried every time you missed my school recitals? You know that she stopped telling you about her problems because you always offered rational solutions instead of just listening? I didn't answer back then. What could I have said? That he was right? That I really didn't know how to show emotion? Didn't know how to be supportive the way Alice and Ethan needed me to be? That I was hiding behind work because it was clear and structured, unlike the chaos of human relationships? Ethan left, slamming the door, and I was left alone in a house that was suddenly too big and empty. Sighing, I put the invitation on the table and rubbed my eyes. Maybe this was a chance to mend my relationship with my son, to meet the girl he'd chosen, to show that I could change, that I cared. The next day, I called the number on the invitation to confirm my attendance. A female voice answered, identifying herself as the event organizer. She took down my name and politely said goodbye, showing no particular interest in the fact that the groom's father was coming to the engagement party. The remaining days passed in a familiar routine, but my thoughts kept returning to the upcoming event. What to wear? What to say? Should I bring a gift? I felt awkward, like a teenager before a first date. Absurd for a man of my age and position. The night before the engagement, I pulled out my best suit from my closet, the navy blue one I'd only worn to important client meetings and Alice's funeral. It still fit perfectly. I'd kept in shape despite my age, thanks to my daily morning jogs and no excessive eating. On the day of the engagement, I woke up with a feeling of anxiety. This feeling haunted me as I shaved, ate breakfast, and got ready to go out. I chose as my gift antique silver cufflinks that had once belonged to my father. Alice had kept them in a family heirloom box, saying that one day we would pass them on to Ethan. It seemed to me that now was the right time. The Azure restaurant was located in the historic center of Emporia, in a restored early 20th century building. I parked a block away and walked slowly down the street, peering at the storefronts to delay the moment of the meeting a little longer. In my jacket pocket was a small velvet box of cufflinks, which for some reason seemed incredibly heavy. At the entrance to the restaurant stood a girl with a guest list. She smiled at me with a professional smile. "Welcome. Your name, please?" "Raymond Caldwell," I answered, feeling a strange dryness in my mouth. Her gaze slid down the list, and her smile became a little tenser. "Ah, yes, Mr. Caldwell. The groom's father. Please come in. The ceremony will begin in 15 minutes." I entered the hall decorated with pastel-colored flowers and ribbons. The guests were already gathering, talking in groups, laughing. I recognized a few old family friends, nodded to them from afar. No one came up to greet me. Perhaps they didn't recognize me, or more likely they felt some awkwardness, knowing my complicated relationship with my son. And then I saw him. Ethan was standing against the far wall, talking to a young woman in an elegant champagne-colored dress. That must have been Prudence. Even from my seat, I could see how my son had changed over the past year. He looked more mature, more confident. His dark hair, inherited from his mother, was neatly trimmed, and his smile to his bride was as open and sincere as I hadn't seen in a very long time. I took a deep breath and headed toward them. When Ethan noticed my approach, he tensed up, his smile disappearing. He said something to the girl, and she turned to look at me. She had piercing green eyes and an expressive face with high cheekbones. Beautiful, but with a sort of wary expression that came on as soon as she realized who I was. "Ethan," I nodded, stepping closer. "Congratulations on your engagement." "Dad," he said dryly, "I didn't expect you to come. You sent the invitation." It was a formality. We stood opposite each other like two strangers forced to make small talk. Prudence shifted her gaze from me to Ethan, clearly sensing the tension between us. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your fiancée?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. Ethan frowned slightly but nodded. "Prue, this is my father, Raymond Caldwell. Dad, this is Prudence Baxter, my fiancée." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Baxter." I extended my hand. She accepted the handshake, briefly, formally. "Likewise, Mr. Caldwell. Ethan's told me about you." Something in her tone told me that Ethan hadn't said the most flattering things. I nodded, not knowing what to say. The awkward pause lingered. "If you'll excuse me, I have other guests to greet," Prudence said finally, and then, after a quick glance at Ethan, stepped away. It was just the two of us. "How are you?" I asked, sensing how corny the question sounded. "I'm fine." Ethan avoided looking me in the eye. "I work at the same company. I got a promotion last month." "Congratulations." "That's good." Silence again. "Prudence seems like, interesting girl." I tried again. "She's an administrator at St. Catherine's Medical Center. We met at a charity run." "I see." I nodded, wondering what else to say. "I brought you a present." I pulled out a box of cufflinks and handed it to him. "These were your grandfather's. Mom wanted you to have them." Ethan took the box with some hesitation, opened it, and stared at the silver cufflinks. "Thank you," he said quietly. And for a moment I thought I saw a glimpse of the boy I remembered. "They are beautiful." "You could wear them to the wedding," I suggested. "If you want to, of course." He nodded, closing the box and putting it in his pocket. "Speaking of the wedding," Ethan started, but he was interrupted by the clinking of glasses. The organizer announced the beginning of the engagement ceremony. The guests began seating themselves at the tables. I found my name on a card at table number 5, in the far corner of the room, along with distant relatives and strangers. As I sat down in my seat, I watched Ethan and Prudence walk out into the center of the room, holding hands, glowing with happiness. I looked at my son and thought about how little I knew him now. When did he grow up? When did he become this confident young man ready to start a family of his own? And why do I feel so heavy, like I've missed something irretrievably? Congratulations began. Toasts, music. I sat at my table talking politely to my neighbors, but I kept finding myself looking for Ethan. I wanted to talk to him more, to learn more about his life, about his plans for the future. But he was busy with the guests, smiling, accepting congratulations, dancing with Prudence. I was a stranger to this celebration of life. As the evening drew to a close, I decided to leave without attracting attention. Ethan's voice stopped me on the way out. "You're leaving already?" I turned around. He was standing a few steps away from me, without Prudence. "Yeah, it's getting late," I replied. "Thanks for the invitation. It was good to see you." Ethan nodded, and I felt like he wanted to say something, but didn't dare. "Listen," he finally said. "Prue and I are planning a wedding in 3 months. It's nothing big, but I thought maybe we could meet before then, discuss the details." "Sure." I felt something warm spill into my chest. "Just tell me when it's convenient for you." "I'll call you," he promised. And I believed him, even though something in the back of my mind told me that this wasn't the conversation I was hoping for. But in that moment, I wanted to believe that our relationship could still be saved, that all was not lost, that we could start over. Ethan called a week after we got engaged. I had just gotten home from work and was about to heat up the leftovers from last night's dinner when the phone rang. When I saw my son's name on the screen, I froze for a moment, not believing my eyes. He rarely called first. "Ethan," I answered, trying to hide the surprise in my voice. "Hi, Dad." His voice sounded strained. "Do you have time to meet this week? There's something we need to talk about." "Sure," I tried to sound casual, though my heart was racing. "When and where would be convenient for you?" "How about tomorrow night? The Old Mill, 7 How?" The Old Mill was a small cafe in the center of town where Alice and I sometimes went on weekends. Neutral territory, not my house or his apartment. Smart choice. "I'll be there," I confirmed. Hanging up the phone, I wondered, what did he want to talk about? He'd mentioned a wedding at the engagement party, so maybe it would be about that. I decided not to speculate and just wait for our meeting. The next day I arrived at the Old Mill 15 minutes early. It was a habit I couldn't get rid of. Better to wait myself than to make others wait. The cafe hadn't changed much since I'd come here with Alice. The same wooden tables, the same pictures of old Emporia on the walls, the same aroma of freshly brewed coffee and pastries. I chose a table in the corner where I had a good view of the entrance, ordered a coffee and waited. Ethan showed up at 7 sharp, accompanied by Prudence. That surprised me. I thought we'd be talking alone. They spotted me and headed to my table. "Good evening," I greeted them, getting up. "Hi, Dad." Ethan nodded, pushing the chair back for Prudence. "I hope you don't mind that I brought Prue. What we want to discuss concerns both of us." "Of course not," I turned to the girl. "It's good to see you again, Prudence." "Prue," she said with a polite smile. but her eyes remained wary. They sat down across from me. I noticed Ethan take Prudence's hand in his, as if he wanted to support her. Or himself. So, I began after a pause as they ordered their drinks. What did you want to talk about? Ethan and Prudence exchanged quick glances, and then my son coughed. We've decided to set a date for the wedding, in 2 months on the last Saturday in June. That's soon, I remarked. Congratulations. Yeah, we don't see the point in postponing, Ethan said, and something in his tone made me wary. We've already started planning, Prudence intervened. We found a great place. The Laurel Wreath restaurant on the lakeshore. They have a beautiful outdoor ceremony site and a banquet room for 50 people. Sounds wonderful, I nodded, still not understanding where they were going with this. The waitress brought their orders, a cappuccino for Ethan and tea for Prudence. When she stepped away, Ethan took a deep breath. The thing is, a wedding is an expensive event, even if we try not to do anything extravagant. Ah, that's what it is. The money. Of course it is. And you want me to help with the expenses, I finished for him. Ethan looked confused. We both work, and we've already saved some of it. Prue's parents are helping too, but the restaurant requires full payment in advance, and we don't have enough. How much do you need? I interrupted, already pulling out my checkbook. Wait, Ethan held up his hand. I'm not asking you to just give us the money. It's your only son getting married. I thought you'd want to be a part of it. Do your part. I looked at him carefully. Something in his words sounded insincere, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Perhaps he was just embarrassed to ask for financial help. Of course I want to be a part of this, I said, trying to make my voice sound softer than usual. And I'll help. How much do you need? Prudence gave me a sum of money. A fair amount, but not exorbitant for me. I could afford it. I'd been living modestly since Alice's death, and I had a good amount of money in my account. Okay, I nodded. I'll pay for the restaurant in full. Consider it my wedding present. There was relief on both their faces, though Prudence seemed surprised at my willingness to help. Thanks, Dad, Ethan smiled, looking sincere for the first time that evening. It means a lot to us. It's very generous of you, Prudence added, but I could see something like suspicion in her eyes, like she was waiting for a catch. You're my only son, Ethan, I shrugged, and I want your day to be special. We moved on to discussing the details. When to pay, how best to do it. I offered to contact the restaurant directly and arrange everything. Prudence gave me the manager's contact details and a preliminary estimate. As we talked about practical matters, the atmosphere became less tense. Ethan even told a few stories about work, and Prudence mentioned her family, her parents, who lived in the suburbs of Emporia, and her younger sister, who would be her maid of honor. However, when the conversation turned to organizing the wedding and the question of my involvement beyond the financial side, I noticed Prudence tense up slightly. I have a list of things to do before the wedding, she said, pulling a clipboard out of her purse. Is there anything in particular you'd like to take on, Mr. Caldwell? For example, helping with transportation for guests or... Prue, Ethan interrupted her gently. Let's not overload Dad with details. He already helps a lot with the financial side. I noticed something flicker in Prudence's eyes. Irritation? Displeasure? But she smiled quickly and put the clipboard away. Of course you're right. I'm sorry, Mr. Caldwell. That's all right, I replied. And please call me Ray. Ray, she repeated as if tasting the name. Okay. We finished our discussion and paid for our drinks. As we left the cafe, I suggested, maybe you could stop by for dinner next week. I'm not the best cook, but I'm pretty good at roasts. Ethan looked surprised and Prudence looked wary. That would be nice, Ethan answered after a pause. But we're on a very tight schedule right now with the wedding preparations. Maybe later? Sure, I nodded, trying not to show disappointment. Whenever it's convenient. Just let me know. We said our goodbyes and I watched them walk away holding hands. Something in their postures, in the way they walked, as if taking a secret with them, made me feel like an outsider, an extra in their lives. The next day I contacted the restaurant and paid the full cost of the wedding banquet. The manager was pleasantly surprised when I told him I wanted to pay the entire amount at once, not in installments like customers usually do. It's wonderful that you're so supportive of the newlyweds, she said as she processed the paperwork. Not every father is willing to make such a gesture. I nodded, not going into the details of my relationship with Ethan. After all, it was our own business. A few days later, Ethan called to thank me for paying for the restaurant. The conversation was short and formal. He didn't mention a possible dinner at my house or any other meetings before the wedding. In the weeks that followed, I received occasional messages from him, mostly informational, about the progress of the wedding preparations. One time he sent a picture of the invitations he and Prudence had chosen, asking my opinion. I replied that they looked elegant. It was true, though I had little understanding of such things, and would have trusted Alice's choice had she been alive. A month before the wedding, I received a call from Prudence herself. It was unexpected. We'd never spoken without Ethan present. "Mr. Caldwell." "Ray," she began a little nervously, "I'm sorry to bother you, but we've had a little problem with the restaurant. They say there's an additional charge for some services that weren't included in the original estimate." "What kind of services?" I asked, feeling a wave of irritation rising inside. I didn't like it when people changed the terms of a contract after it was made. "Decorations, special lighting, photographer's services." She listed a few things. "Ethan and I can cover some of it, but—" "I'll handle it," I interrupted her. "Give me the contacts of the manager you're talking to now." She dictated a name and phone number, thanked me, and quickly said goodbye. In her voice I could hear relief, but also something else. Perhaps embarrassment at having to ask for help again. I called the restaurant and had a pretty tough conversation with the manager. As a result, the extras were included in the original bill with no increase in cost. The manager apologized for the misunderstanding and assured me that everything would be arranged to perfection. When I called Prudence back to let her know the outcome of the conversation, she expressed surprise and gratitude. "You've been very helpful, thank you," she said, and for the first time I could hear a note of sincerity in her voice. "You're welcome," I replied. "If you have any more problems, don't hesitate to get in touch." After that, Prudence called me several times with questions about the wedding arrangements. She seemed to begin to trust me in practical matters, although our conversations always remained formal and businesslike. 2 weeks before the wedding, Ethan finally invited me to dinner. Not to my house, but to a small restaurant near their apartment. This time Prudence wasn't there, and we could talk in private. "How are the preparations going?" I asked when we ordered. "Crazy days," Ethan shook his head. "Prue is thinking about 1,000 details that I didn't even realize. Who knew choosing colors could be so stressful?" I smiled. "Your mom was the same way. I remember her going through what seemed like 100 shades of white for our wedding." Ethan froze for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, that sounds like her." We rarely talked about Alice after she died. The subject had always caused tension between us. But now, to my surprise, Ethan continued. "I recently found some old photos from your wedding. You both looked happy." "We were happy," I answered quietly. "It was one of the best days of my life." Ethan looked at me curiously, as if he'd seen something new. "You know, you've never talked about Mom like that. About your feelings." "I'm not one to express emotions easily," I shrugged. "That doesn't mean there aren't any." "Prue thinks I'm like you in that," Ethan said with a slight chuckle. "He says that sometimes he can't understand what I'm thinking." "And what do you say?" "That I'm trying to be better, more open." It sounded like an implicit rebuke, but I decided not to focus on it. "That's good," I said instead. "Communication is important in a marriage. Your mother always told me that." The conversation turned to more practical topics: final preparations for the wedding, the guest list, organizing transportation. I offered to help, but Ethan politely declined, saying that he and Prue were in control. "Speaking of guests," he said when we got to dessert, "Grandma Helen asked if you'd be at the ceremony." Helen was Alice's mother, my former mother-in-law. Our relationship had always been cool, and after her daughter died, she had practically stopped talking to me, blaming me for not paying enough attention to Alice during her illness. "Of course I will," I replied, surprised by the question. "Why was she asking?" Ethan paused. "Just wanted to know. Well, you know what she's like." "Yeah, I knew. Helen never thought I was good enough for her daughter and probably didn't think I was a good enough father for her grandson now." "I'll stay away from her," I promised. "I don't want to create any awkward situations at your wedding." Ethan nodded, but his gaze was strange, like he wanted to say something else but didn't dare. As we said our goodbyes as we left the restaurant, I asked, Is there anything else I can do for you before the wedding? Ethan shook his head. No, you've already done enough with the restaurant. This, it means a lot to us. He looked embarrassed, and I felt that invisible wall that had always separated us in the last few years was reappearing between us. Ethan, I said, making up my mind, I know we haven't always gotten along, and I know that a lot of it is my fault. I haven't been the father I should have been. But I want you to know that I'm proud of the man you've become. And I'm glad you found Prudence. My son looked at me in surprise, then something flashed in his gaze, understanding. Perhaps? And he nodded. Thanks, Dad. We hugged awkwardly, for the first time in years, and went our separate ways. On the drive home, I reflected on our conversation. Something about Ethan's demeanor alarmed me, but I couldn't figure out what it was. He was polite, even open at some points. But I sensed a reticence, some mystery between us. In the following days before the wedding, I barely spoke to Ethan or Prudence. One time she sent me a text asking me to clarify if I would be with a chaperone at the ceremony, and I replied that I would come alone. There was no further contact. I felt strangely detached from the whole wedding preparation process. Despite my financial support, I wasn't privy to the details. I wasn't asked for advice. I wasn't involved. It was like I was an outside observer, a checkbook with legs, not the father of the groom. Perhaps that's how it was supposed to be. After all, it's their day, their celebration. I've had my wedding, and now it's Ethan's turn to make his own memories, his own family. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I hoped that our relationship could have been changed for the better by this event, that we could have grown closer. The day before the wedding, I ironed my best suit, shined my shoes to a high shine, and prepared an envelope of money, the traditional gift to the newlyweds, on top of the banquet already paid for. I wanted them to have a good start, so they wouldn't have to worry about finances, at least for the first time. Looking at my reflection in the mirror, graying temples, wrinkles around my eyes, the general look of a man who has lived long enough to know the value of his decisions, I thought about how fast time flies. It seemed like only yesterday I'd held newborn Ethan in my arms, and now I was getting ready to walk him down the aisle. I didn't even know what my role in the ceremony would be. No one had discussed it with me. I went to bed with a heavy heart, sensing that the wedding wouldn't be as joyous an occasion as it should have been, at least not for me. The last week before the wedding was unusually hot for Emporia. The thermometer read 30 degrees in the shade. The air conditioners were running at full blast, and I spent long hours on construction sites, checking for safety regulations in such extreme conditions. By the end of each day, my shirt was sticking to my back, and my head was buzzing with fatigue and stuffiness. On Wednesday, with exactly 3 days until Ethan's wedding, I came home particularly exhausted. There had been a small fire at one of the facilities due to faulty wiring, and although there were no injuries, I had to spend hours dealing with the fire department and filling out endless reports. All I dreamed of as I slid the key into the front door lock was a cool shower and a quiet evening with a book. That's not what fate had in store for me. As soon as I crossed the threshold, the phone rang. The screen showed a name I didn't recognize, Prudence Baxter. Not Prue, as she'd asked me to call herself, but officially her full first and last name. Raymond Caldwell here, I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral, even though I was getting anxious inside. Hello, Mr. Caldwell. Prudence's voice sounded strainedly polite. I'm sorry to disturb you. I'd like to see you. There's a matter we need to discuss. In person. I paused, trying to figure out what could have happened. Another problem with the restaurant? Something with Ethan? Of course, I agreed. Did something happen? No, nothing urgent, she answered quickly. It's just something that would be better discussed in person. Are you free tonight? I groaned in my mind. All I wanted to do was rest. But maybe it really is something important. Yes, I'm free. Where do you want to meet? Maybe the Bluebird Cafe on Maple Street? In an hour? The Bluebird was a 15-minute walk from my house, a small, quiet place that wasn't usually crowded on weekdays. Okay, I'll see you there, I agreed. As I hung up the phone, I wondered, what could Prudence possibly need 3 days before the wedding that she couldn't talk about on the phone and that she didn't think required Ethan's presence? Maybe some kind of surprise for my son, or another financial problem she didn't want to tell him about. I took a quick shower, changed into a fresh shirt and pants, and headed to the coffee shop. On the way, I pondered Prudence. In the few times we'd talked, I'd never been able to form a definite opinion of her. She was polite but reserved, and behind that restraint I sensed a certain wariness. Maybe Ethan had told her some unflattering things about me, or maybe she had her own reasons for keeping her distance. The cafe was cool and quiet, just a couple customers against the far wall, and the barista behind the counter. Prudence wasn't there yet, so I chose a table in the corner, ordered a coffee, and waited. She showed up 10 minutes later, elegant in a light summer dress, her hair in a bun. I noted that she looked tense. "Sorry I'm late," she said, sitting down across from me. "Traffic." "That's okay," I replied. "Would you like to order something?" She shook her head. "No, thanks. I won't be long." Something in her tone made me wary. She sat up straight with her hands on the table, her fingers twitching slightly, the only sign of excitement she allowed herself. "So," I began after a short pause, "what did you want to talk about?" Prudence took a deep breath, as if about to dive into cold water. "Mr. Caldwell, I came to talk about the wedding, or rather, about your presence at it." I froze, feeling something inside me clench. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously. "Look," she glanced quickly into my eyes and then looked away. "I know you've done a lot for us. Paying for the restaurant is very generous, and Ethan and I are grateful. But," she paused, and in that pause I could hear everything she was about to say. "But you don't want me at the wedding," I finished for her. Prudence looked embarrassed but determined at the same time. "The thing is, Ethan is really worried about your relationship. Every time he comes back after seeing you, he comes back upset, broken. He tries to hide it, but I can see it." I remained silent, stunned by her candor. Prudence continued. "The last few months of wedding preparations have been very stressful, and I want our day to be a happy one. For Ethan, for me, for all the guests." "And my presence will make it unhappy?" I asked quietly. "I'm afraid so," she answered, and for the first time there was a note of regret in her voice. "Your history with him, it's too painful. Too many unspoken grievances, too many old wounds. We tried to mend our relationship in preparation, but it didn't work." I finished for her again. She nodded. "Ethan doesn't know I'm here. He would never dare to tell you himself. He thinks he has to invite you because you're his father, because it's the right thing to do. But I see what it costs him." I felt anger and resentment rise up inside me. Who does she think she is, this girl, to say these things to me? What does she know about my relationship with Ethan, about what we'd been through? "Prudence," I began, trying to remain calm. "I understand your concern for Ethan, but don't you think that's a decision he should be making for himself? Not you for him?" Her eyes narrowed. "I know my fiancé better than you do, Mr. Caldwell. With all due respect, you haven't been around for the last few years. You didn't see him cry on the anniversary of his mother's death because he couldn't go to the cemetery with you. It would have been too hard. You haven't heard him talk about you, with such a mixture of love and pain that it's heartbreaking." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I didn't know Ethan had been crying. I didn't know he wanted to go to the cemetery with me. I always went alone, assuming he preferred to visit his mother's grave at other times. "I'm not trying to come between you two," Prudence continued, seeing my confusion. "I just want to protect the man I love from pain, at least on our special day. And you think the best way to do that is to ask me not to come to my only son's wedding?" My voice sounded muffled. "I'm asking you to think of him, not yourself," she replied firmly. "Once in a lifetime. It was too much." I felt the blood rush to my face. "You don't know anything about me," I said, barely containing my anger. "About what I did or didn't do for my son, about my feelings for him." "I know the outcome," she parried. "I know there's a chasm between you two right now, and I know that Ethan suffers every time he tries to bridge it." We stared at each other across the table, she with defiance, me with poorly concealed rage. In that moment, I saw clearly that she truly loved Ethan and was willing to protect him at all costs, even if it meant making an enemy of me. And I couldn't help but respect her for that, no matter how much her words hurt. "What exactly do you want from me?" I finally asked. "You want me to just not show up? Make up some excuse? Lie about being sick? I want you to do what's best for Ethan, she answered. If you think your absence will upset him more than his presence, then come. But if deep down you know I'm right, then perhaps the greatest gift you can give your son for his wedding is not to ruin the day for him. Her words, not ruin his day, echoed in my head. Could my presence really ruin the happiest day of my son's life? Would it really be that bad? I'll think about it, I said after a long pause. Thank you for your candor. Prudence nodded, clearly relieved that the conversation was over. Thank you for listening, she said, standing up. And again, I'm not trying to interfere with your relationship. I just want our wedding to be a happy one for everyone. She left and I sat there, staring at the empty space in front of me. The coffee had long since gone cold. My mind whirled with thoughts and memories. Ethan as a kid, his first bike, school parties, graduation, Alice's funeral, our rare and awkward encounters in recent years. Where and when did it all go wrong? At what point did I lose touch with my son? I left the cafe and walked home, despite the heat. I needed time to comprehend everything Prudence had said. With each step, the anger and resentment inside me grew. How dare she tell me what to do? How dare she come between me and my son? But underneath that anger lurked another feeling, fear. Fear that she was right, that I really have been hurting Ethan all this time without realizing it, that my presence at his wedding would be a burden instead of a joy. At home, I sat in the chair, the same one Alice used to sit in when she was reading or knitting in the evenings. What would she say now? What would she advise me to do? I knew the answer. Alice had always put Ethan's happiness first, was always willing to back down if it was best for him. Sometimes to love is to let go, she'd said. But does that apply to a father-son relationship? Could I just let Ethan go? Let him live his life without me? The phone rang, snapping me out of my musings. It was Ethan himself. Dad? His voice sounded strained. Did you talk to Prue? So she told him about our conversation after all. Or maybe he noticed her absence and made her confess where she went. Yes, we went out tonight, I answered honestly. Look, he started quickly. I didn't realize she was going to tell you all this. It's not Ethan, I interrupted him. Your fiancée cares a lot about you. She wants your day to be special. She had no right to decide for me. He sounded annoyed, but not at me, but at Prudence. That surprised me. Maybe she said what you were afraid to say, I said quietly. There was a pause. I could almost hear him breathing on the other end of the wire, searching for words. It's not that I don't want you at the wedding, Ethan said finally. It's about, hell, I don't even know how to explain it. Every time you and I meet, I hope that things will be different, that we can talk like normal people without this wall between us. And every time I walk away feeling like we're still strangers to each other. His words were like a knife in my heart, because I felt the same way. Every time I hoped and every time I was disappointed. I understand, I said, and I don't want you to worry about it on your wedding day. I won't be there if that's what you want. It's not about what I want, he exclaimed with sudden passion. It's about what should be. You're my father. You should be at my wedding. It's, the right thing to do. Even if it hurts both of you? I asked. Ethan didn't answer. I could hear his heavy breathing. Listen, son, I said softer. Let's do this. I won't insist on my presence. You'll think it over and decide for yourself. Whatever you decide, I'll understand. It's not fair, he muttered, and I could hear in his voice echoes of the teenager he'd once been. You're putting the decision on me, like you always do. His words hurt me. Was it true that I'd always done that? Okay, I said after a pause. Then I'll be blunt. Your fiancée is right. My presence will ruin your wedding. You'll be embarrassed to introduce me to her parents, embarrassed to watch me sit apart from everyone, because no one will want to talk to a sullen old man. You'll worry if I'll say something stupid, if I'll offend anyone with my candor. And instead of enjoying the happiest day of your life, you'll be looking around to see if I'm okay. Dad, I don't... Let me finish, I interrupted him. I know I haven't been the perfect father. I know there's a lot between us that's left unspoken and unforgiven. But I don't want to be a source of stress for you, especially on a day like this. So yes, I'm not coming to the wedding. It's my decision, not yours. You can tell everyone that I'm sick or that I have a work emergency. Or the truth, that we decided it was best for everyone. There was a long pause. When Ethan spoke again, his voice sounded strangely detached. If you really feel that way, then fine. I'm sorry for what happened. I'm sorry too, I replied sincerely. Yeah, I'll call you after the honeymoon, he said uncertainly. Sure, I agreed, even though we both knew it was unlikely to happen. We said goodbye, and I hung up the phone with a heavy heart. Everything had happened just as Prudence had envisioned. She knew my son better than I knew myself. I spent the rest of the evening in a daze, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I would not be going to my only son's wedding. In fact, I've been asked to stay away because my presence hurts. What could be more humiliating for a father? When the initial shock passed, cold fury took its place. I remembered how easily Ethan had accepted my decision not to come. How Prudence had spoken to me with barely concealed contempt, like I was some toxic element that needed to be isolated. How they'd both used me, my money, my help, and yet deemed me unworthy to attend their party. And then it hit me. The restaurant. I had paid for the entire wedding reception in advance, in full. The money's already been transferred. It's all paid for. They can get along fine without my presence, but not without my money. The decision came instantly, like the flick of a switch. If they don't want me at the wedding, then they don't want my money either. It was all or nothing. I picked up my phone and dialed the Laurel Wreath restaurant. It was late, but I had direct contact for the manager I'd chatted with earlier about extras. Laura, this is Raymond Caldwell. I apologize for the late call, but I have an urgent question about my son's wedding this Saturday. She was surprised but polite. Of course, Mr. Caldwell. What can I do for you? I'd like to cancel the payment and the event. There was a pause during which I could almost hear her blink with surprise. Cancel it? But the wedding is only 3 days away, and everything's already paid for. I know, I want to withdraw the payment and cancel the reservation, I repeated firmly. Is that possible? Technically, yes, but she hesitated, clearly unsure how to respond to such an unusual request. Normally, if you cancel within that time frame, we'd withhold the full price as a penalty. And the young couple, do they know about this? No, I answered honestly. And I would prefer that you not inform them until the wedding day. It's a family matter. She hesitated, and I understood why. My request sounded strange and suspicious, but I was the one who had paid for the banquet and technically had the right to cancel it. Mr. Caldwell, perhaps you should discuss this with your son and his fiancée. Such decisions are usually made jointly. Laura, I interrupted her, I understand your concern, but I insist. If necessary, I can come tomorrow and sign all the necessary documents, and I am ready to pay a penalty if it is provided. After a few more attempts to dissuade me, she finally agreed. Very well, Mr. Caldwell. I'll issue a cancellation and a refund. But I must warn you that, as a matter of policy, we will retain 50% of the total amount as liquidated damages. That's fine with me, I replied. We agreed that I would stop by the next day to sign the paperwork and pick up a refund check. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Bitterness, anger, but also some grim satisfaction. They wanted a wedding without me? They'll have it, but without my financial support. Part of me realized that I was being petty and cruel, that I was punishing Ethan and Prudence for their candor, that a real loving father would never do this. But the other part, the part that was hurt and humiliated, the part that felt used, whispered, they deserve it. Let them understand what it means to reject me. The next day I went to the restaurant and filed all the paperwork to cancel. The manager still looked concerned and asked several times if I was sure. I was sure. As I drove back home with a check for a decent amount of money in my pocket, minus the forfeit, I pondered what would happen on the wedding day. The newlyweds and guests will arrive at the restaurant, ready to celebrate, and then they will find out that the banquet has been canceled, that there is no food, no music, and none of the things they had hoped for. What will they do? How will they react? I imagined the Prudence's fury, Ethan's confusion, the guests' embarrassment. These thoughts gave me mixed feelings. On the one hand, I felt hurt that I was hurting my son on such an important day. On the other, I felt a kind of grim satisfaction at the thought that they would realize, that they couldn't just take my money and reject me. Deep down, I knew that my decision had been driven by pain and resentment, not reason. Knew that it would probably ruin what little was left between Ethan and me forever. But in that moment, I was too angry and hurt to think about the consequences. The remaining days before the wedding passed in a strange state of suspense. Ethan didn't call. Apparently, he thought the matter was settled. Prudence didn't get in touch either. I continued to go to work, filling out reports, checking objects, as if nothing had happened. But inside me, a storm of emotion was raging. Several times I picked up the phone to call the restaurant and rescind my decision. Reinstate the reservation, apologize, pretend it was a misunderstanding. But each time I remembered Prudence's words, "Your presence will ruin the wedding," and my hand with the phone dropped. The evening before the wedding, I sat in my chair looking at Alice's picture. What would she say if she knew what I'd done? She'd probably be disappointed, maybe even angry. Alice had always put Ethan's well-being above everything else. She would never have approved of what I did. But she wasn't here. It was just me, a lonely old man, full of bitterness and resentment, ready to destroy my own son's happiness because of wounded pride. For a moment, I felt ashamed. I thought about calling Ethan, warning him, to give him a chance to find another place, to save the situation. But it was too late. The restaurant was probably taken by another reservation. The guests were on their way. All the plans had long since been confirmed. I had made my choice, and now all I had to do was wait for the consequences. The day of Ethan's wedding was surprisingly overcast. Gray clouds had covered the sky of Emporia since morning, promising the rain that the citizens had been waiting for after a week of sweltering heat. I woke up early, out of habit, though I had nowhere to rush to. I wasn't going to work or the wedding today. My plan for the day was simple: stay home and wait for the inevitable call that would come after Ethan and Prudence discovered that their wedding reception had been canceled. The morning hours stretched agonizingly slow. I tried to do the usual things: read the paper, watch the news, check the mail, but I couldn't concentrate. My thoughts kept returning to what was going to happen today. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon, after which the guests would move to the banquet hall to celebrate. That meant that by about 3 o'clock, they would know the truth. And by 4, I would probably hear words from my son that I had never heard before. At noon, I felt like I couldn't sit inside 4 walls any longer. It was lightly raining, but that didn't stop me. I put on a light jacket and went for a walk around the neighborhood. The streets were almost empty. The weather had dispersed the usual Saturday strollers. Raindrops drummed softly on the leaves of trees and asphalt, creating a peaceful melody that didn't match my inner state at all. I walked on, mindful of the road, and thought about how things had gotten to this point. How is it that I, a once loving father, now sit waiting for the moment I can hurt my own son? At what point did our relationship become so bad that such revenge seemed justified? Maybe it started when Ethan was 12. I had just been promoted to head of security and was completely absorbed in my job. Ethan played on the high school baseball team and was always asking me to come to his games. I promised, but I rarely kept my promises. There were always more important things to do: urgent meetings, unscheduled inspections. Alice went to all his games and told me afterward how he played. But it wasn't the same. I could see the disappointment in my son's eyes when I told him I couldn't make it again. But I convinced myself that providing for the family was more important. Or maybe the problem started earlier. Alice always said I was too hard on the boy, too demanding. "He's a child, Ray, not a little adult," she kept saying. But I thought I was instilling in him discipline and responsibility, qualities that would serve him well in life. I didn't allow myself to be weak or too soft, thinking it wouldn't be good for him. Perhaps I was wrong. And then there was Alice's illness. 18 months of gradual decline, during which I tried to keep everything under control: work, home, treatment, finances. Ethan was 23 at the time, just out of college and starting work at an IT company. I thought he was doing fine, that he didn't need my support the way Alice did. I didn't notice that he was suffering too, that he needed a father, not just someone to solve practical problems. After the funeral, Ethan and I drifted apart for good. He blamed me for not paying enough attention to Alice in the last months of her life. I blamed myself for the same thing, but I couldn't admit it out loud. Pride wouldn't let me. So instead of seeking reconciliation, I withdrew into myself, and he left to build his life without me. The rain intensified and I turned back toward the house. The clock read almost 2, the time when the ceremony was supposed to start. I pictured Ethan in his suit, nervously adjusting his tie, and Prudence in her white dress, anxiously waiting to walk down the aisle. I imagined the guests gathering on the lakeside grounds, probably carrying umbrellas because of the rain. They still had no idea that there would be no celebration. The house was quiet. Only the ticking of the old floor clock in the living room broke the silence. I threw off my wet jacket, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and sat in a chair, looking at the phone on the coffee table. All that was left to do was wait. Strangely, at that moment I felt not the grim satisfaction I had expected, but tiredness and emptiness. It was as if something had broken inside me, and now there was a hole that could not be filled. I would take revenge on my son for choosing to be happy without me. And what good would that do me? A fleeting sense of superiority, the bitter satisfaction of having proved my power? And the price of that would be a permanent break with the only man I had left. Maybe it's not too late to make things right. Call the restaurant, apologize for the misunderstanding, pay for the banquet again, perhaps with an additional rush fee. I picked up my phone, found the restaurant's number, but didn't dial it. Something was stopping me. Pride, stubbornness, or just the realization that it was too late. By now, everyone must be at the restaurant, and if the banquet was canceled, it couldn't be restored in 5 minutes. I put my phone back down and leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. The day Ethan was born came to mind. I held him in my arms, so small and defenseless, and vowed that I would always protect him, always be there for him when he needed my help. What happened to that young father, full of hope and love? When did he turn into this sullen, resentful old man, ready to destroy his own son's happiness out of revenge? The phone rang at exactly 3:45. I flinched, even though I'd been waiting for that call all day. Ethan's name on the screen made my heart race. I took a deep breath and answered, "Yeah? What did you do?" Ethan's voice shook with rage. In the background, I could hear a murmur of voices and crying. It must have been Prudence. "What are you talking about?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what I was talking about. "Don't pretend," he shouted. "You canceled the payment for the restaurant. We just got kicked out, all of us, along with the guests. They said you withdrew the payment and canceled the reservation 3 days ago." I remained silent, not knowing what to say. Now that the moment had arrived, all the explanations I had prepared seemed empty and unconvincing. "How could you?" Ethan continued, his voice breaking with emotion. This is the lowest, most petty thing you've ever done. Do you have any idea what it's like to stand in front of all our friends and family when the manager says the banquet has been canceled and we need to vacate the premises immediately?" "Yeah." Prue's parents offered to pay, but they didn't have that amount of cash with them, and the card didn't go through because of the limit. Prue is sobbing. Her parents are in shock. My friends don't know what to do. Everyone is just standing in the rain in the parking lot because we have nowhere to go. I heard someone talking to him in the background, a female voice, probably Prudence. She was asking something, and then I heard her exclaim, "Give me the phone." A second of rustling, and then Prudence's voice came through the receiver, ringing with rage but surprisingly controlled. "Listen to me carefully, Mr. Caldwell. I don't know what you were trying to prove with that act, but you have just ruined the most important day of your son's life, and mine. If your goal was to hurt us, congratulations, you succeeded." "Prudence," I started, but she wouldn't let me finish. "No, now you listen. I told you that your presence would ruin the wedding, and you decided to prove that you could ruin it without even being there. Okay, lesson learned. But you know what? We're still getting married. Maybe not today and not the way we planned, but it's gonna happen. And when it does, you won't be a part of our lives. Ever." Her voice shook with held-back tears, but there was steel in it. I felt an involuntary respect for this girl who maintained her dignity, even in this situation. "I didn't mean to. I don't care what you wanted or didn't want," she said. "The fact is that you did it, and now you have to live with the consequences. Goodbye, Mr. Caldwell." There was another rustle in Ethan's voice. "Dad, do you realize what you've done? You didn't just ruin our wedding, you humiliated us in front of everyone we know. I'll pay for everything, I said, realizing how pathetic that sounded. I'll pay the money back. Make it up to you. Money? He laughed bitterly. You think this is about money? The point is that you used it as a weapon, as a way to control and punish. Your fiancée said my presence would ruin the wedding, I reminded him, feeling the old resentment rising. And instead of proving her wrong, you did everything you could to show that she was absolutely right, that you were actually capable of ruining our day. He was right, and I knew it. Prudence feared that I would bring tension and discomfort, and I proved that I was capable of far worse. Ethan, I'm sorry. I was angry and hurt. I didn't think about the consequences. Yes, you did, he interrupted. You knew exactly what was going to happen. You imagined us standing there, humiliated and confused, and it gave you satisfaction. Admit it. I didn't say anything because he was right. I did envision that scene, and part of me did wait for that moment with grim anticipation. Where are you now? I finally asked. I can come over, bring the money, help you find another place. Don't you dare come, Ethan cut me off. You've done enough. Prue's parents booked a few tables at a restaurant nearby. Not as grand as we had planned, but at least the guests won't go hungry. And tomorrow we leave as planned. A honeymoon without a wedding is a little weird, but it's better than staying here. Son, please, don't call me that. His voice turned icy. You lost the right to call me son the moment you decided to get back at me like that. Those words hit me harder than I expected. Everything suddenly became real. The things I'd done, the consequences, the price I'd paid for my petty revenge. Not just a ruined day, but a ruined relationship, possibly forever. I'll help pay for a new ceremony when you get back, I offered desperately. Anything you want. Just give me a chance to fix. Fix it? Ethan laughed bitterly. Some things can't be fixed, Dad. Some behaviors can't be forgotten or forgiven. This is one of them. Ethan, I have to go. The guests are waiting, he paused. You know what the ironic thing is? I've been defending you. All these years when Prue or anyone else said you were cold and unfeeling, I said, no, you don't know him. Deep down inside, he's a caring person. He just doesn't know how to show it. I really believe that. Even when Prue said you could ruin our wedding, I couldn't imagine that you would actually do that. Intentionally, calculated. His voice shook, and I realized he was crying. But now I know, he continued quietly. Now I know who you really are. Ethan, wait. But the phone was already ringing. He hung up. I sat staring at the phone in my hand, feeling the world around me crumble. What had I done? For what? To prove I had power? To avenge my wounded pride? The price was too high. The rain pounded against the window, getting heavier by the minute. I pictured Ethan and Prudence, their guests running from one restaurant to another in the pouring rain, trying to salvage what was left of their special day. Imagine the embarrassment and awkwardness they must have felt as they explained the situation. I imagine the disappointment and anger on the faces of Prudence's parents, who probably doubted from the beginning that their daughter was tying her life to the son of a man like me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt real shame. Not just regret for the mistake I'd made, but a deep, overwhelming shame for what I'd become, for letting resentment and bitterness poison my soul to the point where I was willing to hurt my own son. I tried calling Ethan again, but he didn't answer. I sent a text message apologizing, and it went unanswered. I tried calling the Prudence number, and it went straight to voicemail. They cut me off, and I couldn't blame them. I spent the rest of the day sitting in a chair, listening to the rain and replaying moments from Ethan's life. His first steps, the first day of school, graduation, the days when we were still a family. It all seemed so far away now, like scenes from someone else's life, from a movie I'd once watched. As evening fell, the rain turned into a torrential downpour. Thunder shook the walls of the house. Lightning bolts illuminated the room with flashes of bluish-white light. I didn't turn on the lamps, sitting in the dark, feeling that it suited my inner state. At some point, must have been around 10 p.m., I realized I was crying. Quietly, no sobbing, just tears streaming down my face, mixing with the raindrops tapping on the glass. I hadn't cried at Alice's funeral, held myself together like a man should, like a father who has to be strong for his son. I hadn't cried when Ethan had first told me his grievances and left with a slammed door. But now in this quiet, dark room, accompanied by a thunderstorm, I finally allowed myself that weakness. I cried for my mistakes, for missed opportunities, for not knowing how to express my love when I needed to. I cried for my loneliness, which now, after what had happened, seemed like an eternal sentence. But most of all, I cried for hurting the person I loved most in the world, my only son. I don't remember when I fell asleep in the chair, but I woke up to the sound of the phone. For a moment, my heart beat faster. Maybe it was Ethan? But glancing at the screen, I saw that it was just the alarm clock, which I forgot to turn off for the weekend. 6 in the morning. The house was quiet. The storm had passed, leaving only drops on the window panes. A new day was beginning, but nothing had changed for me. I was still the man who had ruined my own son's wedding, and with that knowledge, I had to move on. I'd been up all night after Ethan's call. My son's words echoed in my head, awakening a whole range of emotions: regret, shame, anger, resentment. At first, regret prevailed. I pictured the confused faces of the guests, the Prudence's tears, Ethan's humiliation. But with every hour I spent thinking about it, another feeling grew in me: exasperation. Why should I feel guilty? They rejected me, cut me out of the most important event in my son's life, used my money while claiming that my presence would ruin the party. Isn't that a betrayal? Didn't I have the right to strike back? By morning, I had convinced myself I was right. Yes, the method was harsh, but the lesson was necessary. You can't just discard people when they become inconvenient, especially if you continue to enjoy their financial support. The call came around 11 in the morning. I expected it, but still flinched when the phone vibrated on the desk. Ethan's name on the screen. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the conversation. I wasn't going to apologize or make excuses this time. I was ready to defend my position. Yes, I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. We need to talk. Ethan's voice was tense, with barely contained rage. Of course, I agreed. I'm listening. Not on the phone. We'll be there in an hour. Be home. He hung up without waiting for an answer. Didn't even say please or see you later. He just gave me an order, like I was his subordinate. It made me even angrier. Who did he think he was? I spent the next hour pacing around the house, put away the cups left over from the evening, wiped down the tables even though they were already clean, checked to see if there was any coffee in case I had to offer them any. Old habits of hospitality that are hard to shake off, even when you know the visit will be far from friendly. Exactly 1 hour later, 1 minute to the minute, the doorbell rang. Ethan had always been punctual, a trait he had inherited from me. I opened the door and saw them both. Ethan in the same suit as yesterday, only rumpled, his eyes reddened from sleep, and Prudence pale, her hair in a sloppy bun. Both looked haggard. Come in, I said, stepping aside. They walked into the living room in silence, not looking at me. I closed the door and followed them in. Ethan remained standing, though Prudence sat on the edge of the couch, as if ready to jump up at any moment. Would you like some coffee? I offered. We're not here for a social visit, Ethan cut him off. We're here to talk about what you did yesterday. I nodded and sat down in my chair, gesturing for Ethan to sit down. He remained standing, towering over me, a position of dominance he'd probably chosen deliberately. I want to know why, he began. Why did you choose to humiliate us like this in front of all our friends and family? What have we done to deserve this? I looked up at him, feeling a wave of indignation rising inside. Did they really not understand? Are you asking what you did? I raised my eyebrows. How about we start with the fact that your fiancée came to me a week before the wedding and bluntly told me that my presence would ruin your celebration? Prudence flinched and Ethan clenched his fists. That's no excuse. Or maybe from the fact that my own son agreed to exclude me from the most important day of his life, and yet he didn't hesitate to take my money? I continued, interrupting him. What do you call it, Ethan? I think it's called hypocrisy. Ethan blushed with anger. So you decided to get back at us? Well done, Very mature for a 65-year-old man. Not revenge, but a lesson. I felt the corners of my lips twitch in a smile that must have looked cruel. If you don't want me at the wedding, you don't want my money either. All or nothing. That's my principle. Your principle? Ethan laughed bitterly. No, it's not a principle. It's manipulation and control. That's what you've always done, using money as leverage. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. Really? And when have I ever used money to pressure you before? Maybe when I paid for your education? Or when I helped you with the down payment on your apartment? Or maybe when I offered to pay for your wedding with no strings attached? You always made conditions, Ethan exclaimed. Maybe not in words, but you always made it clear that for your money I had to meet your expectations, to be what you wanted me to be. I shook my head, feeling the anger grow into real anger. That's not true, and you know it. I've always supported you. Financially, emotionally. Emotionally? He interrupted me with an incredulous chuckle. You? The man who couldn't even give me a hug at my mom's funeral? You don't know what emotional support is. That wasn't fair. I didn't hug him at the funeral, not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid of breaking down, of showing weakness. He should have realized that. Everyone has their own way of showing care, I said quietly. Just because I didn't show emotion the way you thought I should, doesn't mean it wasn't there. I thought I understood you, Ethan continued, that deep down inside you cared about us. You just didn't know how to show it. But what you did yesterday, that's not the act of a man who cares. It's the act of a man who cares more about control and power than his own son's happiness. I noticed Prudence put her hand on Ethan's shoulder, a gesture of support that he didn't even seem to notice, so absorbed in our conversation. You talk about control and power, I grinned. What were you two trying to do when you decided to exclude me from the wedding, but still use my money? Isn't that manipulation? Prudence, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Mr. Caldwell, I admit that I may have been too direct in that conversation, but I acted out of concern for Ethan. I saw the effect your meetings had on him, the way he came back upset each time. I wasn't trying to manipulate or control. I was trying to protect the man I love from pain. Protect from pain? I laughed, and it was a harsh, unpleasant laugh. And how did you do that? Judging by yesterday, not very well. Prudence's eyes narrowed. What happened yesterday is entirely your fault. You could have just not come to the wedding like we discussed, or you could have come and proved me wrong about you. Instead, you chose the cruelest, most humiliating way to get revenge. I wasn't seeking revenge, I replied, though I knew that wasn't entirely true. I was just doing justice. You didn't want me at the wedding? Fine, but then don't count on my financial support. It's all logical and fair. Fair? Ethan shook his head. You canceled the payment 3 days before the wedding without telling us. If you had said right after you talked to Prue that you wouldn't pay, we could have found other options. But you deliberately waited until the wedding day to strike the maximum blow. That's not honesty, that's calculated cruelty. He was right, and part of me knew it. But admitting a mistake now, after everything that had been said, seemed impossible. It would mean surrender, admitting I was wrong on all counts. Perhaps I could have done things differently, I said at last. But the point remains the same. You wanted to use my money while rejecting me. It's not fair, and you know it. Fair? Ethan laughed bitterly. Let's talk about fair. Is it fair that I grew up with a father who always put work before family? Who skipped my school plays for meetings? Who, even on the day my mom died, took the time to check email, but not to hug his son? Every word hit like a whip. I didn't remember checking email the day Alice died, but maybe it was true. Those days blended into one endless nightmare for me. I always did what I thought was best for our family, I said quietly. I may have been wrong in my methods, but my intentions were always good. Hell is paved with good intentions, Ethan parried, and whatever you think of your intentions, the result speaks for itself. Mom died feeling lonely, despite your presence, and I grew up not knowing how to actually express emotion because my father thought it was a weakness. His words about Alice feeling alone hit a nerve with me. It was my greatest fear that I had failed her in the last months of her life, that I hadn't given her what she needed. Your mother knew I loved her, I said, trying to keep my voice firm. We'd been together for 30 years. We had an understanding that didn't need constant verbal affirmation. Is that what you think? Ethan shook his head. Do you know what she said to me shortly before she died? She said, "Don't be like your father, Ethan. Don't hide your feelings. Don't put off important conversations until later. Life is too short for that." I felt something inside me snap. Had Alice really thought that? Had she suffered from my emotional restraint all these years when I thought we had a complete understanding? She never told me that, I said quietly. Because she knew you wouldn't hear, Ethan replied. You never heard when it came to feelings. You always turned the conversation to something practical, rational, and you did the same thing now. You turned the conversation about the wedding into money and fair exchange, as if the relationship between father and son was a commercial transaction. I was silent, not knowing what to say. His words hit something deep inside me, something I didn't want to think about. Do you know what the most ironic thing is? Ethan continued after a pause. Prue was right about you. Your presence would have really ruined our wedding, but not in the way she thought, not because of old grudges or awkwardness. It was because you were capable of such petty, calculated revenge. You proved that you didn't deserve to be a part of our day. Those words hit me harder than I expected. It's one thing to hear them accuse me of being cruel or manipulative, but it was quite another to realize that through my actions, I had confirmed their worst fears about me. I did what I thought was right in that situation, I said, but my voice sounded unconvincing even to myself. No, Ethan shook his head. You did what hurt the most, and you know it. You sat here in this chair, picturing our faces as we were kicked out of the restaurant, and it gave you satisfaction. At least admit it to yourself. I wanted to object, to say it wasn't true, but I couldn't, because it was true. I was really picturing this scene, and part of me was really enjoying the anticipation of their humiliation. It was an ugly, dark part of my soul that I didn't want to acknowledge, but that existed. Perhaps I've gone too far, I said finally, but you're not without sin. You rejected me, but you wanted to use my money. That's not fair. We didn't reject you, Prudence said, disappointment in her voice. We were trying to find a way to make the day happy for everyone. Maybe not the most ideal way, but with good intentions. And you reacted with a cruelty that is hard to even comprehend. We didn't come here to hear your excuses, Ethan said, his voice sounding tired. We came here to tell you that what you did yesterday changed everything. Until now, I had always hoped that one day we would be able to mend our relationship, to overcome old grudges. But now I realize it's impossible, because I can't trust a man capable of such deliberate cruelty. Even if that man is my father. I felt something inside me freeze. It was like a judgment. Final. Irrevocable. Ethan, No. He held up his hand, stopping me. I don't want to hear any apologies or excuses. I just want you to know that we're leaving tonight as planned. And when we get back, we're going to start a new life. Without you in it. Prudence stood up, ready to leave. Her face was pale but determined. One last thing, she said, looking me straight in the eye. You thought you were teaching us a lesson about money and respect. But the only lesson we've learned is that some people can't be trusted, no matter how close they're supposed to be. It's a sad lesson, especially when it comes to a father and son. Ethan took her hand and they headed for the exit. I remained sitting in my chair, unable to get up and follow them, unable to find the words to make things right. At the door, Ethan turned around one last time. You know what the saddest part is? I always wanted to make you proud of me. Always tried to earn your approval, your respect. And now I look at you and I realize I don't want to be like you anymore. I don't want to turn into a man who puts his pride and resentment above the happiness of those he should love. With those words, they left, closing the door quietly behind them, not slamming it, not making a scene, just leaving, as if closing a chapter in a book. I was alone in an empty house that suddenly seemed too big, too quiet. The clock on the wall echoed in my head, as if counting down the time I had irrevocably lost. I went to the window and watched them get into a cab. Ethan helped Prudence with the door, walked around the car and sat next to her. They didn't look back at the house. The cab moved off, taking them away. Out of my life, possibly forever. It was only then that I realized what I'd done. I hadn't just ruined their day, not just caused a temporary inconvenience. I had destroyed the last thread that bound me to my son, the last hope that we would ever be a real family. And all for what? A fleeting sense of superiority? To prove my power? The price was too high and the satisfaction too short-lived. I walked back to my chair and sat down, staring at Alice's picture on the mantel. What would she say now? Probably that I'd finally lost the son she loved so much. And she would be right. The house was quiet, only the clock on the wall ticking, counting down the seconds of loneliness that now seemed like it would last forever. It had been a week since Ethan and Prudence had left my house, closing the door behind them not only literally but figuratively. 7 days in which I'd fluctuated between bouts of remorse and outbursts of anger, between wanting to call them and apologize and being convinced I was right. 7 sleepless nights where I lay in the dark, replaying our last conversation in my head, imagining what I could have said differently, what I could have done differently. On Monday, I went back to work. Routine helped me not to think, to immerse myself in the usual tasks, inspections of objects, reports, meetings. Colleagues noticed my gloomy mood, but no one asked me why. I had always kept my private life to myself, and they respected that boundary. Only Dorothy, my secretary, dared to ask if everything was all right. "Everything's fine," I replied dryly. "Just a little family problem." She nodded, not insisting on continuing the conversation, and I was grateful to her for that. That evening, I stopped by the supermarket on my way home. As I passed the greeting card department, I noticed a stand labeled "Greetings to the Newlyweds." It was like a kick in the butt, a reminder of what I had done. I stopped, looking at the bright pictures with flowers, doves, and rings, at the sweet wishes of happiness and love. In another reality, one where I hadn't succumbed to petty revenge, I could be picking out such a card for Ethan and Prudence right now. But in this reality, I stood alone, with a basket full of frozen dinners for one, and felt the emptiness inside grow larger. At home, I found an envelope in the mailbox with no return address. Opening it, I found a check inside, from Ethan for the amount I'd paid for a forfeit to the restaurant. No note, no explanation, just the check, as if it were my last way of saying, "We don't owe you anything anymore." I sat at the kitchen table looking at that check, my son returning the money to me, as if closing the last bills before the final parting of ways. It hurt more than I could have imagined. Not because I needed the money, but because the gesture emphasized the finality of the breakup. He didn't want to owe me even that. 2 weeks later, I decided to take a vacation, for the first time in years. Not to go anywhere, but just to be alone, to sort out my thoughts and feelings. My bosses were surprised but didn't object. After all, I hadn't taken a vacation in a long time and had every right to it. The first few days I just sat at home, trying to keep myself busy with small things. Fixing the leaky faucet in the bathroom, taking apart the garage, even started sorting through old photos, but stopped when I came across an album of Ethan's baby pictures. On the 4th day of vacation, I called my old friend Harold Pierce. We hadn't spoken to each other for several years. Somehow we'd quietly lost touch after Alice's death. Harold was surprised by my call, but pleased and suggested we meet at the bar, where we once liked to sit after work. "Ray Caldwell, you old devil," Harold exclaimed as I entered the semi-darkened room of Johnny's bar. He hadn't changed much. He was still the same heavy man, with thinning gray hair and a good-natured face. How many years? How many winters? We shook hands and I sat down across from him at a table in the corner. "It's been a long time," I agreed. "How are you doing? How's Martha, the kids?" "Martha's still putting up with me," he grinned. "The kids are all gone. 3 grandchildren already, can you believe it? I'm a grandfather of 3 little noisy creatures." He pulled out his phone and showed me pictures. 2 girls and a boy, all with the same wide smile Harold had. I nodded, pretending to be interested, but inside I felt a prick of envy. He has grandchildren, an extension of his family, a future. And me? I don't even have a son now. "And how's your Ethan?" As if reading my thoughts, Harold asked. "He's already married, if I remember correctly. Alice always said that he was sure to find a nice girl." I froze, not knowing what to say. Should I tell the truth? Tell the story of how I'd ruined my own son's wedding out of petty revenge? Or lie, say that everything is fine, that I'm the happy father of a married son? We don't talk anymore, I finally said. There was a conflict. Harold frowned. Really? I'm sorry to hear that, Ray. You've always been such a close-knit family. I grinned bitterly. Friendly? Maybe it seemed that way from the outside, but there were always cracks in our family, cracks that widened over time until they became an unbridgeable chasm. That's the way it used to be, I answered. But after Alice died, everything changed. Ethan and we have different views on a lot of things. Harold nodded understandingly. Fathers and sons, the eternal story. My eldest and I have been through a lot too. There was a period when he didn't speak to me for almost a year. But then things got better. I'm sure it will work out for you too. I don't think so. I shook my head. I'd gone too far this time. Maybe it was the fatigue or the whiskey or just the need to talk to someone. But I told Harold everything. About the wedding, about the conversation with Prudence, about my decision to cancel the payment, about the consequences, and about the final conversation with Ethan. Harold listened in silence, not interrupting. When I finished, he sighed heavily and shook his head. God, Ray, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, I shrugged. I know what I did was awful. I know I shouldn't have done it. But what's done is done. Now I've got to get on with my life. Did you try to apologize? And he asked. A real, sincere apology can work wonders. I shook my head. I don't think an apology would be enough, and he wouldn't accept it. You didn't see his face when he left. It was over for him. Harold was silent for a moment, then said quietly, You know, after our big fight with my son, I thought the same thing, that it was over, that he'd never forgive me. But time heals, Ray, and love is stronger than resentment if it's real. I wanted to object, to say that our situation was different, that what I'd done was unforgivable, but I didn't. Harold wanted to support me, to give me hope, and I didn't want to reject his good intentions. We sat at the bar until closing time, reminiscing about old times, talking about everything but my problems with Ethan. It was a relief to forget the pain and guilt for a few hours, just to be an old buddy sharing memories. As we said our goodbyes, Harold shook my hand firmly. Don't shut yourself off, Ray. Call, come visit. Martha will be glad to see you. I nodded, though I knew I wasn't likely to take advantage of the invitation. I had to decide what to do next, and I had to make that decision for myself. When I got home, I sat in the dark for a long time, looking at Alice's picture. What would she advise me to do now? To fight for a relationship with my son? To try to make things right? Or let him go, let him live his life without me? That night I had a strange dream. I was standing on the shore of the lake where Ethan's wedding ceremony was to take place. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, a light breeze, the sun reflecting in the water. White chairs decorated with flowers were set out on the lawn. The guests had already gathered, talking, laughing. Ethan stood at the altar, in his wedding suit, happy, smiling. Next to him was me, but not the real me, but some other version of me, softer, more open, able to express my feelings. This other Ray put his hand on Ethan's shoulder, and they exchanged a look of love and understanding. Then the music played, and Prudence appeared in a white dress, beautiful, radiant with happiness. She walked over to Ethan, they held hands, and the ceremony began. And I, the real me, stood back, invisible to everyone, and watched what could have been the reality I had stolen from myself. I woke up with my eyes wet with tears. The dream was so real, so achingly beautiful. It showed me what I had lost. Not just a relationship with my son, but the opportunity to be a part of his happiness, his life, his future. In that moment, lying in the dark, I made a decision. I would not try to get back into Ethan's life. I would not impose, apologize, grovel. He's made it clear he doesn't want me, and I will respect his choice. I'm going to let him go, completely, utterly. And with that, I will let go of my guilt, my regrets, my pain. I'll start a new life, a life without Ethan, but also without the weight of the constant sense of failure that has haunted me since our relationship began to deteriorate. In the morning, I called the office and told them I was taking 2 more weeks of vacation. Then I packed a small bag with the essentials and got in my car. I didn't have a specific plan, just the need to leave behind this house full of memories, this city where every corner reminded me of the past. I left Emporia at dawn and drove west with no particular direction. The road was deserted. The sun was just beginning to rise above the horizon, coloring the sky with pinks and golds. I turned on the radio, and a tune that Alice had once loved blared from the speakers. Strangely, I didn't feel the usual pain at the memory of her, just a quiet sadness and warmth. By noon, I reached the small town of Riverdale, which I had never heard of before. It was a sleepy place with a main street lined with old plane trees, a few stores, a cafe, and a small hotel. I decided to stay here for the night, or maybe longer. I needed time to think, to decide where to go next, not only literally but figuratively as well. The Riverview Inn turned out to be a cozy place with wooden floors creaking underfoot and old-fashioned furniture that was, however, clean and well-maintained. The elderly woman behind the front desk smiled at me. "Welcome to Riverdale. How long are you staying with us?" "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "Maybe overnight, maybe longer." She nodded understandingly, as if she were used to such vague answers. "Well, we welcome visitors for any length of time. Are you interested in anything in particular in our town? We have some great fishing, if you're an amateur." "I'm just looking for a change," I said, surprised at my frankness with a stranger. "Change is good," she smiled even wider. "Sometimes we all need a new chapter. I'll give you a room overlooking the river, the quietest and most peaceful." I thanked her and went up to the room. It was a simple but cozy room with a large window overlooking the river that ran behind the hotel. I set my bag on the bed and walked to the window. The water in the river was clear, and flowed slowly between green banks dotted with wildflowers. The view was peaceful, almost meditative. I stood there for a long time, just watching the water flow, and gradually felt the tension of the last few weeks begin to let go of me. I spent the next few days exploring Riverdale and the surrounding area. The town turned out to be small, but surprisingly picturesque and friendly. I walked along the river, sat in a local cafe reading the newspaper and observing the locals. Even tried fishing, which I had never had an interest in before. To my surprise, it turned out to be a pleasant experience. Sitting on the bank with a fishing rod, enjoying the peace and quiet, not thinking about anything in particular. On the third day of my stay, the innkeeper, who introduced herself as Marjorie, asked me at breakfast, "Do you plan to stay longer in our town, Mr. Caldwell? We have a little house just vacated on the outskirts. It's nothing fancy, but it's got a nice lot and a view of the hills. The owner's moved to the big city with the kids and is looking for a tenant. If you're interested, I can set up a meeting." I got to thinking. I hadn't originally planned to stay here long, but I was starting to like Riverdale. There were no memories here, no past, just the present and a possible future. And the thought of living in my own cabin for a while, away from the hustle and bustle, seemed tempting. "I think I'd like to see it," I said. Marjorie brightened up. "Great. I'll call Frank today. I think he'll be able to show it to me tomorrow." The cabin was a small log structure on a hill with a covered porch overlooking the valley. It had everything you needed inside: a bedroom, a living room with a fireplace, a kitchen, and a bathroom. The furniture was simple but sturdy and comfortable. Around the house was a small plot with a few fruit trees and an overgrown vegetable garden. I haven't taken much care of it the last couple of years. Frank, an older man with kind eyes and heavy hands, said in an apologetic tone. "I'm in poor health, but the land is good, fertile. You could revive a vegetable garden if you wanted to." I had never gardened, but the thought of growing my own vegetables suddenly seemed attractive. It would be something completely new, unlike my old life, filled with reports, inspections, and endless meetings. "I'll take it," I said, to the surprise of Frank, who must have expected me to bargain or ask for time to think. "For 6 months to begin with, if it suits you." We agreed on a price which was surprisingly low compared to city standards, and the next day I moved out of the hotel and into my new abode. I had few possessions, only what I had taken with me when leaving Emporia. But that didn't bother me. On the contrary, there was something liberating about starting with a clean slate, without the weight of the past embodied in things. In the following weeks, I immersed myself in setting up my new home and plot. I bought gardening books, tools, seeds. I began to restore the vegetable garden that had been neglected for several years. It was hard physical work, but it gave me a strange satisfaction. Every evening I went to bed exhausted, but with a sense of accomplishment, with the feeling that the day was not wasted. Gradually, I began to get to know the locals. Riverdale turned out to be the type of small town where everyone knows each other and where the newcomer is immediately noticed. People were curious, but not intrusive. They greeted me when I showed up at a store or cafe, sometimes stopped to talk, but no one asked personal questions or tried to find out why a person my age had suddenly decided to move to their quiet corner. A month after moving in, I decided it was time to decide on my future. I called the office and informed them of my decision to retire. My bosses were surprised. I had always seemed like a man who would work until his last breath, but they didn't object. I was entitled to a decent pension, and with my savings I could afford a modest but comfortable life in Riverdale. Then I contacted a realtor in Emporia and had him sell my house. It was a difficult decision after all. That house had been a big part of my life, where I had lived with Alice, where Ethan had grown up. But I knew I wasn't going back there. There were too many painful memories, too many ghosts of the past. I needed a fresh start, without constant reminders of my mistakes and losses. One warm fall day, sitting on the veranda of my new home and looking out over a valley painted in gold and red, I thought about Ethan. Where is he now? How is his life with Prudence shaping up? Was he able to forget or at least forgive what I'd done? Part of me wanted to reach out to him, see how he was doing, maybe even try to explain why I'd done what I'd done. But the other part, the more rational part, realized that would be selfish. I had hurt him, ruined one of the most important days of his life. Now the best thing I could do for him was to get out of his life, to let him move on without me, without my toxic influence. I pulled out my phone and took a long look at Ethan's contact on the list. Then, taking a deep breath, I pressed delete. It was a symbolic gesture, but it signified my final decision. I'm letting go of my son. I'm letting go of our past. I'm letting go of my regrets and guilt. I am starting a new chapter, and in this chapter, there is no room for old wounds and unfulfilled hopes. That night, I wrote a letter to Ethan, not to send, but to myself, to express everything I was feeling. I wrote about love, about pride, about disappointments and mistakes, about how I regret my last act, but realize that some things can't be undone or forgotten, about how I wish him happiness in his new life and hope he doesn't repeat my mistakes and doesn't let pride and resentment ruin relationships with those he loves. When I finished the letter, I reread it, folded it up, and put it away in my desk drawer. Maybe someday I'll send it. Maybe I won't. The important thing is that I said everything I wanted to say, even if only to myself. From that day on, I stopped looking back. My new home, my garden, my new acquaintances and interests all became the center of my life. I started helping out at the local library, sharing my knowledge of safety with school children. I got a dog, an old Labrador from the shelter who was as lonely as I was. Named him Charlie, and he became my faithful companion on walks around the Riverdale neighborhood. Sometimes on particularly quiet evenings, as I sat on the veranda watching the sunset, I felt sadness for the lost opportunities, for the broken relationship with my son. But that sadness was no longer so acute, so all-consuming. It had become a part of me, like a scar that reminds you of an old wound, but no longer hurts. I realized an important truth. Sometimes letting go of a toxic relationship is the only way to find peace, even if that relationship is with your own son, even if their destruction is your fault. Some bridges are indeed burned forever, and there's no point in standing on the shore mourning them. You need to find another path, another shore, another purpose, and I have found my way. Not the one I had once dreamed of, not the one I had planned, but it was mine, and in it I found a contentment and peace I had not known in a very long time. In Riverdale, I'm known as the quiet, somewhat reserved man with a dog who lives in a cabin on a hill, grows great tomatoes, and is always willing to help neighbors with minor repairs or safety advice. No one knows about my past, my mistakes and losses. And I like it that way. Here I'm not the father who ruined his son's wedding. Here I'm just Ray, a man who found his place and his peace after years of struggling with himself. Sometimes I dream of Ethan, not the adult, hurt and angry, but the little boy with the wide smile and trusting eyes who once looked at me with admiration and love. In these dreams, we are together, happy, without a shadow of resentment or misunderstanding. I wake up with a slight sadness, but also with gratitude for these moments of imagined reconciliation, for the opportunity, at least in my dreams, to be the father I should have been in reality.